Hi, Lowell. Welcome to Funnel Vision. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Hey, Elena, good to see you, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, wanted to chat today about, driving sales transformations and different types of organizations, which I know is your expertise. Um so let's talk about like when you step into like a founder-led or hero-led organization, what are some of the signals that you look for that the revenue engine needs to evolve from that founder-led and personality to a true sales system?
Yeah, this is a great question because this is where it really all starts. Right? As a member of Chief Outsiders now, and in my past life as a full-time operator, you always want to go into a growth situation understanding where does the revenue come from. So you're always looking at that revenue story and figuring out how do they make it happen here. And what you would like to see is a scalable, repeatable engine, but sometimes, unfortunately, what you do see is that you run into clients that have business from just a few partnerships, or they have a few rainmakers that make things happen at the end of quarter when they have heroics. And those are the signals that, hey, you don't really have what you need to grow over the long term. And worse yet, you might have already hit your ceiling and maybe facing declining growth because you don't have a scalable process in place.
Yeah, yeah. And when you have we often kind of come across the very similar. We work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses who are just building those sales teams, and it's oftentimes like a founder-led sales and getting that the information, how a founder does sales and, kind of drives that process is not always a repeatable, or it's not a repeatable, scalable process. It's more just kind of what they do and they're passionate about it, and so it is really that like tweak from going from that, founder led to getting all of that information out of that person's head and really creating a process that other people can, can use to grow the company. So it's always a challenging time for, for a company to be there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Especially in founder-led businesses where they're entrepreneurs, they're successful entrepreneurs, they're used to making things happen. And a lot of times it's just a let's just do it mentality. And so you often see that, right? You see a very tactical approach to growth, which is good when you're trying to get a business up and running. But then when you're trying to scale it out, as you just said, how do you take all that magic, put it in a bottle so that it can be scaled out to a broader market among your staff?
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of where I guess for, kind of for this, like, a lot of times founders are like, "Okay, we need to, grow. I don't wanna be the only salesperson. We need to just hire people." So, it goes to kind of jumping into just, "Let's just hire more sales reps and,
Yeah.
see how that goes." But in your experience, what does, like, a real building of that process look like in terms of, like, strategy, process, enablement versus just like, "Let's hire people."
Yeah, I'm laughing because oftentimes when you hear founders or CEOs say, "Yeah, I want to go through a transformation," right? And you dig into, well, what do you mean? And they're like, "Oh, let's just add more territories, or let's just tweak the incentive comp plan." And those are just cosmetic fixes, and oftentimes it's throwing good money after bad. In a case that's
Mhm.
not going to lead to real growth, and so. I when I talk to founders about driving real growth and transformation amongst your team, I'm looking at three things. So we talked about the revenue story. So digging into that and really understanding where your leads come through today. What is your ideal customer profile? What does that look like? How do you deploy your teams to reach that ideal customer? And then what are some of the processes, which leads into thing number two, to support that, right? What are your forecasting processes? What are your lead conversion processes? All of those things are there. And then the last third thing that you want to have and make sure that you have a good transformation in place is that enablement layer, if you will. And the enablement layer not only includes like tools, CRM tools, which we all think and know about, but also the training and the marketing that goes behind it. Um, and this just will leads into I've always run in this conundrum where we talk about, do we have the right people in sales? And I've often found that most of the time you do have people who want to be successful, but your job as leaders in the business is to make sure that they're empowered with the things to go out and be successful. And so having those three things, right, the aligned go-to-market strategy, the sales processes, and then that enablement layer, those are the things that are really necessary to have a true rebuild, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely resonates with, what I see, with my clients as well. Oftentimes they do have good people, and it's the process, the strategy, the things, like all of the things that kind of behind the scenes that really need to be tweaked and improved, and kind of really ratified to make, to enable those people to have success.
That's right. That's right.
You might have the best salesperson, but if there's not that true process and system that's really like well thought out, and kind of makes a lot of sense, and has like that, kind of proven system, it's very hard to, even if you've got a great person, to make them successful if there's not that process and kind of that backbone behind it. So sometimes that comes across as, we need to replace this person, we need better
Yeah.
sales reps,
Yeah.
when, the first thing is often like, let's look at the process. Let's look at, how to make this in, like, make sure that we're giving the people all of the things that they need, and the tools and the marketing and everything else, to make them successful.
That's right, and I'm sure you see this from your lens too, making sure that they have the leadership support, right, to bring the best out of them, to develop that talent and grow them, and I'm sure that's where you play a role bringing in that right leadership to bring the best out of the sales force.
Yeah, yeah, and it's about that leadership, either walking into an existing team and just kind of, helping them grow and motivate and lead, and then sometimes it's also, kind of helping them build the strategy to, to get to the right place, and find the right, make sure they do have the right people as well. So yeah, it's a lot of those kind of little things that are put together to make the team successful. um, so you've led growth across, small organizations, but also large, complex healthcare, med tech environments. Like, how do you think about optimizing demand and lead flow across like the full life cycle, from first touch through payers, partners, retention, expansion? I know that's kind of probably more than we have time for, but like in as a whole, what's your kind of way of approaching that?
Yeah, one of the things I've learned across the journey, and then we see it lots of times at chief outsiders as well, is demand is not simple anymore. Right? So gone are the days where um, you just go chase net new growth from talking to a provider, and that's it. And the story, you do that well, you grow. It's much more complicated now. There is a complicated ecosystem in healthcare specifically, where you not only have to reach the patient, you often have to reach that prescriber, then you have to reach that health system as a whole, and then the payer. And you have to have a value story for each of those stakeholders in the ecosystem, to really be successful. So that's one. And then beyond that, once you are able to bring in that net new business, you want to make sure that it's a seamless experience so that your retention is there and that you set the foundation for growth. Um, there was a recent body of work by Don Weary, who is the chief revenue officer at Chief Outsiders, recently, where she talked about the more predictable growth now comes from within a customer's install base. And that's not intuitively how leaders think about it. You always think about, let's go get new growth, and we have to get new growth to be expansive. Well, you already have the growth right there in your pool many times. So how do you tap into that? Not only keep them happy, but then expand out into broader solutions and increase that value chain. And that's where leaders need to be thinking about now when they're talking about demand and growing.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And you mentioned earlier, sometimes, leaders are like, we want to look outside, we want to look for a new territory. Let's go add this sales rep here, or things there. But really looking at your, like internal where you can grow your existing client base, what you can do, and all that is so important as well.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't want to go get net new business. You obviously have to do that. It's more of a case of walking and chewing gum at the same time, so to speak.
Hmm.
You have to do both to ensure that you have the scalable, repeatable
Right.
engine that you need to achieve value in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. And for CEOs or founders that are preparing for a major sales transformation, what do you think that they should have in place before, pulling those levers? Like, is there new leadership, new segments, new channels? Like what's important to have in place during this transformation or before the transformation?
So the checklist for CEOs as they start to think about this, they should really have three things on there. So they need to make sure that there is a shared fact base. That everyone has the same understanding of what the data is telling them in terms of segmentations, what are the profitable channels, who should we be chasing, what the value proposition is. Because if you're not starting from that shared fact base, you're already going to go awry. So that's number one. And then number two, um, you want to come to an understanding of what is the growth theses that we're solving for. Right? What's the growth problem that we're trying to solve by this? And then what are the constraints? What constraints do we have in terms of funding or other resources? You want to have a good understanding of that. And then the last piece is sort of the cultural piece. Is the organization ready for change? And and I've seen this is where I've seen many organizations falter. The leaders might say, "Hey, there's a big imperative, a burning platform on why we need to change," and the leadership might have that understanding, but they don't clearly articulate that throughout the organization. And so at that frontline level, there's not an understanding of why do we need to do things differently. We've grown this way before, and we know we can have success this way. Why do we need to change now? And so without that reorientation or understanding of why you need to change, perhaps in the new changing and dynamic market, you're bound to fail. So they need to solve those three things, and then once they feel like they have a good handle on that, they're really set up for success in the transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And then, what you said also is really like bringing that down and having everyone, in the sales organization understanding that, what the reasons are for this change, kind of getting that buy-in, getting people excited, and not just, kind of saying this is what we're doing, but having everybody understand like why are we doing this and what's the benefit for the company and then, for them as well. But really getting that like buy-in and, kind of everyone motivated to the same reasoning. And that does come down with like, you know, being open and talking about like the why, or these are the reasons that we're doing this, versus just kind of saying this is what we're doing and follow me. But like, and especially with the, kind of the younger generations now too, like it's really important to get people like motivated and understand, the why behind things, versus in, kind of the older generations that are, kind of just okay, this is what you say and this is what I'm going to do. Like getting that motivation and buy-in and understanding is really important.
Yeah. And and to be fair, change historically has always been difficult and hard. That's why we're all in the roles that we typically have because it involves some sort of change and you need really good people to drive it. But what I would say now, today, you have tools that help you enable that change that people before didn't have. And
Mm.
if you're not leveraging these tools, we talk about AI a lot. We're really committing malpractice, commercial malpractice, if we're not deploying those tools to help put in place those processes and help the organization understand what's happening with the market.
Yeah, for sure. And so how does leading sales transformation differ in an SMB or founder-led setting versus a larger or like PE backed organization? And what are some of the common mistakes that you see leaders make if they treat both of those situations the same?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and certainly, when you're talking about a large organization versus a smaller mid-market or even a founder-led organization, you have to recognize that the tools that you have available to you are going to be inherently different. A large
Mhm.
organization has typically lots of tools at its disposal, lots of resources to drive those changes, and they can afford to make do some things and make mistakes perhaps that would be more fatal for smaller businesses. So you have to recognize that, and you have to um, be deliberate and intentional, but be a bit more thoughtful about the resources when you're in that smaller led
Mhm.
environment or even PE backed environment where driving value is critical. And so, putting some planning in place, not so much planning that you are stalled and you're not dynamic enough to move with the market, but understanding how can you pragmatically move towards a goal with the tools that you might have in place versus the tools that you wish you would have had in a larger
Mhm.
organization.
Yeah, for sure. So it's so important to make sure that those distinctions are there. And they're looking at it from, a perspective that makes sense for the size and, stage of that company as well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, well, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, where people can find you, and tell us a little about you.
Yeah, sure. So, I like to describe myself as a commercial athlete. I started a long time ago back in life sciences at Pfizer, Novartis, and grew up in frontline sales, frontline management in that environment. Went back to business school and then spent a lot of my career at GE Healthcare and a variety of different businesses. And that's truly where I learned how to be a commercial advisor. I was part of a program called the Experienced Commercial Leadership Program, and we were essentially commercial problem solvers for different businesses within GE. And so that's where I really fell in love with solving commercial problems, helping businesses grow. I moved into the PE backed environment. And my first stop was Everdera, which is part of a contract research organization called PPD, which was a Carlisle portfolio company at the time. Eventually had a successful exit when it sold to Thermo Fisher Scientific. And then most recently, I was at a healthcare services organization, PE backed, much smaller, $100 million in revenue, and successfully helped drive growth there to the $200 million mark before founding my single shingle and then eventually joining Chief Outsiders, where you can find me today. And part of the reason I'm there is that Chief Outsiders has a terrific bench of fractional executives. So even if I'm not the one that's able to solve the commercial problem, you can tap into 125 other executives who have seen it and done it
Mhm.
before that can help solve that and drive outcomes for clients. And so I really love being a part of that group and seeing the value that we drive for clients there.
Yeah, fantastic. Amazing background that you have and experience that you bring to the table. And yeah, I can't speak highly as enough about Chief Outsiders as also a client of Chief Outsiders as well. Like we just absolutely the talent and people that are on the Chief Outsiders team is just phenomenal. And I'm impressed with every person that I speak to from Chief Outsiders. So wonderful. Thank you so much for being on Funnel Vision today. I great conversation and appreciate your time.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.